morning, everyone. Well, we're continuing the series at church on practicing the way of Jesus. And today, the title of the sermon is Silence and Solitude, Jesus and the Quiet Place. And we've been looking, particularly in the last number of weeks, at practices or spiritual practices that Jesus did and that he wants us as his apprentices to develop in our lives, using him as our model. Now, I want to caveat, just reiterate, or just reinforce is the word I'm looking for, that I'm no expert on practicing silence and solitude. I stand up here, I hardly even recognise it as a thing in my life. I guess reading the Bible and praying in my time, a devotion time, is something that I've done, but not really looked into it more in the level of what I'm hopefully going to share with you today. And I hope I can inspire you that this is a wonderful practice that would be very beneficial for us to develop. The talk structure today, we're going to go through this: the problem, Jesus, our guide to the quiet place, a close look at it and what it's like with and without it, some encouragements and warnings, and then some markers on the way to the eremos, which I will talk about in a moment. Now, let's start with the problem. You might remember this show. In this show, Laura and her children leave the hustle and the bustle and the demands of the city life to go and move to a small coastal town called Pearl Bay, and hoping to have a quieter life. And there's an opening or vacancy at the local courthouse, and Laura thinks this will be, okay, I can do this because she's a high-powered lawyer in the city. So she comes out to this town and she thinks, I can maybe do this role as the judge in the little courthouse. It'll be a walk in the park. But what she soon discovers is she's very wrong, because life is just as, if not more complex in this little town than it was in the city. And so she can't really get away from it all. And people do this, don't they? They plan to do, as they get to a certain point in their life, they want to have a sea change, maybe a tree change if you want to go to the forest or the hills. People try to get away from it by going camping or hiking. There seems to be a strong desire amongst human beings for some silence and solitude. Why is that? I want to put that question out there. Hold that question in your mind, and I want to share with you that every holidays I try to plan to spend some time going camping solo, which a lot of you would know. I've talked to you about it and how much I love that. So I plan this time in the holidays coming up. Time to connect with nature and to read, to pray, etc. But many other demands often fill up the diary. For example, a hose pipe bursts in the bathroom and floods the bedroom. I have to fit in visits to my family, and they all live far away. And then not only that, but on the way to the camping, the engine in my ute starts to die and has no power. It's cutting out in power, and I think, will I even get there? So the diary fills up, demands fill it up, and silence and solitude often comes last. Why? There's two whys. Now, modern society, with all this busyness and the demands, we just want to get away from it. It seems toxic. We crave to get off the treadmill. Have you ever felt that? Let me share with you when I was a new teacher. I'd been teaching for a few years, and turns out to be quite a demanding job and stressful. And perhaps because of that, I don't really know, I developed an autoimmune disease and I was getting very sick. And I can remember a treatment came to light that would require me to have some significant time off. And I went to see my boss, Gay, and Gay sat down with me and I was sort of saying, Gay, I need to have the rest of the year off. It was November at least, if I was going to do this treatment. I don't know where it's going to head. She said, Ben, go and do what you need to do to get better. She basically gave me permission to get off the treadmill. And I can distinctly remember having the treatment, coming home and sitting in the couch on the armchair and just feeling like I'm allowed to not be busy and have these demands and stresses. I'm allowed to relax. Almost needed someone to tell me I could do that. And I felt the weight just literally coming off my shoulders in that moment. Now that was kind of a rare event in my life. Not everyone can have that happen. Probably don't want it to happen. You don't even want to get sick to have that happen. But that was my situation. But in reality, the thought of silence and solitude can seem like a joke or an impossibility, if not scary. What's going on? Well, who knows what happened in 2007? Think about 2007. If you're a techie, you might remember that 2007 iPhone, you got it. That was the year that iPhone went on the market for the first time. Also in that same year, Facebook came online, as well as Twitter, same year. The App Store was made available to people. And the idea of the cloud. Now, I could have these dates wrong, Ash, you can correct me, but this is what I heard. I believe these all happened in the same year. This idea of the cloud, it gave us access to everything, so it seems, the internet in our pocket. When we were stressed, we could now suppress it with a touch. But our brains could be stimulated anywhere and at any time. This was a radical change to life for humans in the Western world particularly, but increasingly all over the world. Now, in the 1980s when I grew up, boredom was a real thing. And I grew up on a farm, and it was good. Actually, it was a good thing to be bored at times. And I can distinctly remember just following this little creek in winter up into the hills, just wandering and following it and exploring and just being alone and down inside this little erosion, just in another world. That seems to have been lost a lot. It seems hard to get that. Maybe it's just, as a child you can get these things, as an adult you can't, but I feel as though the world, our society and culture is just becoming very fast-paced and our brains are buzzing all the time. And I believe that some of these things might have an influence on that. Now, I'm not a Luddite. Technology is good. I'm not going to go and sabotage the iPhone factory. But do we control the technology that's being put into our hands, or does it control us? Did you know that the attention span of humans, on average, has dropped from 12.5 seconds to 8 seconds in the last couple of decades? That's a 1/3 drop in attention span. That's pretty big. And you might think 12.5 seconds wasn't much to start with, and you're probably right. But that's something. There's an alert there. There's a flag there that says, why would it drop 1/3 in 2 decades? What's happened in that time? That's significant. And why has our attention span dropped? Well, there's a thing called the attention economy. Has anyone heard of the attention economy? This is the idea that people are trying to buy your attention. It's a real thing. There are thousands upon thousands of apps being created trying to compete to distract you and actually addict you. And you might think, addict us? Really? You don't believe it? Well, it's actually true. There's an intentional design in these apps. Big brains and big money is spent on making these things tap into our psychology as human beings to keep us on their app, so that there's a flow of money out of your pocket into their pocket. And that's all it's for. That's all they care about. They don't care if you're addicted or the effect it has on you. They just want money. That's all they really ultimately care about. That's the reality we live in. Is it just me, or do you have times of silence where your thoughts buzz and they scare you, or they make you feel uncomfortable? Your brain may have been inadvertently rewired just by being part of this attention economy. This constant giving in to distraction, it robs time with God and our own self. Good things like books to read, landscapes to be walked, meals to be prepared and enjoyed, and friends to be with, life to be fully lived, is robbed. As a consequence, our soul suffers. Now, Jesus said, what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Can you tap and go to get your soul? Probably not. God seems distant to many people in this distracted world. If we do the analysis, it seems to me that we are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. So that's the problem. But is there a practice from the way of Jesus to help? Yes. Silence and solitude is right up there as something that can help. So let's move on to an excellent place to start our journey of looking at silence and solitude. Let's go straight to Jesus, who's our guide to the quiet place. I want to start by looking at Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. And in Matthew chapter 4, verse 1, the lead up to it is where Jesus has been baptized and then filled with the Holy Spirit. Let's just read verse 1. It says this, "Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting for that's a bit too much. Tempted by the devil in the desert. Led by the Spirit there." Notice, Jesus goes straight to the wilderness after his baptism, filling with the Holy Spirit. He went straight to the wilderness first. Not write a book, record a podcast, or do an interview, as big names and movers and shakers of the world might do. No, he goes to the wilderness. Now, the Greek word is eremos, and that can be translated into English as the wilderness, the desert, the deserted place, the desolate place, the solitary place, the quiet place, the lonely place. This is one of my eremoses, if that's the plural. The eremos. Jesus, I want you to notice that Jesus has a relationship with the eremos, the quiet place. It's probably my favourite way of saying it, the quiet place. Now, you could read the story of Jesus going out into the eremos, the wilderness, in two ways. You could read it that Jesus was weak, he was tired, he was hungry, he was remote and alone. So of course, that's when the devil comes, doesn't he? He comes when we're at our weakest. But then, if you read it that way, why has the Holy Spirit led him there in that state? Or, secondly, you could read this story in this way. It could be that Jesus was at the height of his powers in the wilderness. He was recharged, hungry, but in control, alone and remote, but connected to his Father. In this reading, Jesus was ready to take on his and our enemy and win. Let's look at a bit further on in Mark. If you've got a Bible, you can flick over to Mark 1, or you can see it on the screen. Now, Mark 1 is a bit, you could think of Mark 1 as like Jesus' first day on the job in his ministry. And it's in verse 12, it's preceded by his 40 days in the quiet place. And then he has his busiest day ever. You can see all the headings from the Bible there. So Jesus announces the good news. Jesus calls his first disciples. He drives out an impure spirit. He heals many. And then, what happens? He returns back to the eremos. Can you see there's a pattern here? We have quiet place, busy work, quiet place. The eremos is Jesus' secret weapon. The eremos is where Jesus practiced silence and solitude, and where he wants us to as well, as you will see. Let's have a look at Mark chapter 6, verse 30 to 31. If we look at Mark 6:30, we can see that the apostles gathered round Jesus. The context is Jesus has sent out the apostles to preach the good news and do ministry all around the towns and villages, and they've all returned. So they gathered round Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. They report their work, and in verse 31, it says this: then, because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. They can't even eat. He is so busy. This is what Jesus said to them. He said, come with me by yourselves to watch 2 hours of Netflix. Come with me to go to this mall and do some retail therapy. Come with me, let's clean the house. Let's get it all in order. Let's catch up for coffee with friends. You can even chat to your mum on the phone at the same time. No, Jesus doesn't say that. He says, come with me by yourself to a quiet place and get some rest. What you really need is time alone with me, Jesus says. But in verse 33, the crowd follows. And what does Jesus do? He has compassion. He tries to get them away, but the crowd gets there ahead. What does he do? He has compassion on them, he teaches them, and he feeds them. Miraculously feeds them. It would have been big news, but really he was trying to get away with them for a rest. Now I love the realism of this story. And what the disciples really need is time alone with Jesus in the quiet place. And they are interrupted. Does that ever happen to you? That's life, isn't it? That's life. But after serving the crowd, Jesus gets his time alone. Look in this verse 45 to 46, after the feeding of the 5,000. It says, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. He says, just go, disciples, get away. And after leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Jesus gets his time alone. Notice he sends the disciples away, and he made sure he got his alone time. Jesus is showing us, defend your quiet time with God. Moving on, Luke has 9 stories of Jesus in the eremos. In Luke 5:15, we hear this. The news about him spread all the more so that crowds of people came to hear him. And have I missed a slide there? I don't know. So yet the news about him spread all the more so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Oh, that was the one we missed. That's Jesus after he sent the disciples away in the boat. He gets up on the mountainside. That's where we're supposed to be. So Jesus, in Luke, he does it as well. And there's 9 stories in Luke of Jesus in the eremos. Now, if you charted Jesus' life in Luke with time, busyness this way, and time in the eremos this way. Oh, didn't like the chart. Busyness this way, time in the eremos this way. You chart Jesus' life in Luke. The busier he gets, the more time he spends in the eremos. With us, it's often the other way around. It's the opposite. The busier it gets, the less time we spend in the quiet place. So our graph kind of looks like this. Okay, the busier it gets, we're getting less time in the eremos. Jesus' graph looks like that. Literally the opposite to us, often. So Jesus is giving us a model here. If you read the Gospels and see, as I did, scanned right through them, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, there's 8, 13, 9 and 4 for a total of 34 mentions of Jesus going to the eremos. I think that's quite significant. So let's take a close look at silence and solitude. So clearly silence and solitude was a big thing for Jesus, but what is it? First of all, I'd like to do a bit of a biblical overview or biblical theology of silence and solitude. Here we go. Adam and Eve are brought into the garden, the representation of being with God in relationship. Then sin separates them. God sends them out. Where to? It doesn't matter. The point is they're separated from God. The world is now where people are growing in a culture opposed to God's kingdom. Hence the Tower of Babel, and God scatters them. Attempts to form human communities without God leads to cities. Now, in the Old Testament, it doesn't condemn cities. Instead, God comes to rescue and loves people in cities. For example, Nineveh in the book of Jonah. But God often meets people in lonely places of silence and solitude and reveals himself to them there. Think of Moses in the burning bush on Mount Horeb, or Elijah in the cave on the same mountain. We benefit from coming out of the toxic anti-God culture of the world and recalibrating. And that's why Jesus did it. He, as human, needed the time to be tuned into the truth and to fix his will on the plans he shared with his Father, and so do we. Now in Revelation, at the end of the Bible, in Revelation 22, verse 3 to 4, the consequences of separation are no more, and humans no longer need to seek silence and solitude to tune out the noise of the world and to tune into God, because we will see his face and his name will be on our foreheads. Isn't that nice? Now, after reading all 4 Gospels for how Jesus seeks the eremos, 2 things strike me. First, that there's a real tension in the stories between being in the quiet place and the presence of the crowd. It's pulling 2 directions. The crowd's constantly interrupting and demanding time from Jesus, who is often very often trying to practice silence and solitude and to establish it for and model it to his disciples. But he never gets stressed or angry or drives the crowd away. He ministers to them what he knows they need without succumbing to their agenda. He then gets to the eremos with patience, grace, and determination. Now, as I said before, my own tendency when I've had a busy and demanding time is to seek distraction and to veg out. The second observation is the pattern we saw earlier. Big moments in Jesus' ministry often preceded or followed by time in the quiet place. He drew his strength from that. If Jesus saw this as important, surely so should we. Well, that's the biblical overview. Now we're moving on to defining and doing silence and solitude. A definition for it: it's intentional time in the quiet to be alone with ourselves and God. Let's unpack that a little bit more. There are two types of silences. There's external and internal. Now, external is the absence of, or at least reduction in, sound waves coming into your ears. Sounds kind of obvious, doesn't it? But you try sitting in your house for 5 minutes and see what noise you hear. Well, that should say hear what noise you hear. Consider, not see. You know what I mean. You don't need to get rid of all the noise. You just need to reduce it. You can't get rid of all noise. It's a very rare place to have zero noise sounds. No, internal silence is the other one. What does this mean? It means to reduce the mental clutter, the brain buzzing, the thoughts, the emotions, the worry, the anger, the revenge. Did I print that document at work? Oh, look, a plane. Oh, it's a butterfly. This mental brain buzzing all the time is an internal noise. Silence that. Reduce that. Turn that down. It's not easy. That's silence. What's solitude? Solitude, Richard Foster says, is loneliness. He says loneliness is inner emptiness, but solitude is inner fulfillment. So there's a difference between those two. Now, in his book on burnout, Wayne Cordeiro explains that there is a difference between isolation and solitude. They may contain similar characteristics, but in reality, they are worlds apart. Solitude is chosen separation for refining your soul. Isolation is what you crave when you neglect the first. Now, it took me a while to understand what he was saying there in this quote, but I think it means this. If you don't do the first thing, get silence and solitude and refine your soul, you'll want to get away from the world, curl up under your covers and hide. You don't want to face the problems that may have overwhelmed you. If that is you right now, I want to tell you there is hope. God loves you. And you can come to him with all your anxiety. Let's see how. Let's look at what it's like with and without silence and solitude. When we have silence and solitude, when we practice that, we slow down long enough to feel all emotions we've been running away from. We face the good, the bad, and the ugly in our own heart. We face our lack of desire for hunger and thirst for God. We face our desire for our hunger and thirst for God. We tune into our insecurities, idolatry, fantasies, everything under the surface, the motivations, the addiction that we've used just to get us through the week. All is exposed, but in a safe place with God. We hear the voice of God cut through the wall of sound, all the other voices, the people, the apps, the media, the enemy, the world. We realise this is true and this is a lie. We gain a right perspective. Is that making you feel better? Oh, how I wish that was always the case with me in my life. We also have freedom. Freedom from our shame at our failures and our pride at our successes. Where we have freedom from those things, they lose their power over us. It doesn't become what defines us. We come home to ourselves and God. When we don't practice silence and solitude, we become distant from God. We become distant from ourselves. We lose sight of our identity. The urgent displaces the important. Escapism is chosen over engagement. Remember the phone. We run out of energy to do what's actually life-giving. Prayer, community, Bible reading, just doing something, filling your bucket, kind to yourself. And we turn to our drug of choice. Now, drug doesn't just mean drugs. It could be anything dopamine-inducing. We turn to that instead of the things we actually need. We become easy prey to the tempter. We develop an emotionally unhealthy, reactionary life. Small little things, small comments or criticisms are triggers that set us off in anger, sulking, defensiveness, anxiety, and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, that actually describes me a lot of the time, if I'm honest with myself. And if you want to ask my family members, they'll soon tell you that's present there. But these are all signs and symptoms of a life without silence and solitude. We need to recapture the practice or face spiritual oblivion. Now, you might be thinking, this all sounds kind of serious to me. This is all a bit heavy, Ben. Let me shift gears with you. Let's zoom out a bit and try to understand what is at stake here with some warnings and encouragements. Now, many Christians through the ages put silence and solitude as a number one practice, spiritual practice. Henry Nouwen said, without silence and solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside some time to be with God and to listen to Him. Now, it makes sense, doesn't it, that a relationship with anybody needs time. Think of marriages, think of your friendships. You need to spend time for them to actually work. So the same with God. Another thing, the whole world is talking about mindfulness. You notice that? A lot of talk of mindfulness. Basically, mindfulness is silence and solitude for a secular age. Now, it's linked to Buddhism. People link it to Buddhism, but it's actually way more linked to Christianity. People are unwilling to acknowledge Christianity in our modern culture. I don't know if you've noticed. So Zen gets the credit for mindfulness, but followers of Jesus have been doing it for millennia, until about 50 years ago, or at least until 2007. Perhaps. Generalising. But beware in trying to follow, another warning or encouragement, beware in trying to follow Jesus' example of seeking silence and solitude, in trying to do that. Don't become like a pendulum, swinging from all-in busyness to all-out retreat. Be careful of that. John Stark from the Gospel Coalition, I looked up Henry Nouwen because his quote was there. The Gospel Coalition, John Stark, he evaluated Henry Nouwen's life and ministry and writings, and he identified the struggle he had with this pendulum swinging. But he concludes that Nouwen is a witness to this perennial tension. I don't think he's always an exemplary model, says Stark, but he at least shows us what the fight looks like. This is me speaking now, keep Jesus as our ultimate goal. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. He's our model. This next one might be an encouragement and a warning, but the whole world is crying out for this. This is our moment to lead society to where it needs to go. Andrew Sullivan, in his outstanding New York Times Magazine article called "I Used to Be a Human Being," writes, "Modernity slowly weakens spirituality by design and accident in favour of commerce. It downplayed silence and mere being in favour of noise and constant action. The reason we live in a culture increasingly without faith is not because science has somehow disproved the unprovable, but because the white noise of secularism has removed the very stillness in which it, faith, might endure or be reborn. If churches came to understand that the greatest threat to faith today is not hedonism, but distraction, perhaps they might be able to appeal anew to a frazzled digital generation. There's some encouragement. Who wants to do some silence and solitude? Finally, let's look at some markers on the way to the eremos. You see what I did there? Andrew Teo? Markers, hiking, Bibbleman track, silence, solitude, yeah, okay. Now, here's some practical things before you get started, or continue on if you're already doing it. Some markers on the way to the eremos. Firstly, know your context. What's your personality, season, or stage? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Is life tough at the moment, or is you going through an easy time, if there is such a thing? What stage are you at? Are you young? Are you at uni? Are you single, married, raising kids? Are you older? How long have you been a Christian for? All these things influence how you do silence and solitude. If you're an introvert, you might be thinking, gee, I can't wait to get to do some silence and solitude. This is awesome. If you're an extrovert, you might be thinking, man, I don't know if I could do 5 minutes of that. I might go nuts. But it's okay. You do you, as people like to say these days. 5 minutes is better than, if that's what you can start with, that's fine. Next, secondly, practice, not performance. There's no pressure to fit a particular stereotype. There's no need to be a monk or a nun, unless you want to be one. More practice, not performances points. It's difficult to do silence and solitude. It's countercultural and it's radical. You may say, I just can't do this, but you can. We might make excuses. We might say, oh, I'm an extrovert, I can't do it. But I respectfully disagree in love. Look at the steps to success, which I've shown before in a previous talk. Where do you fit? Are you here? I want to do it, but I can't do it, so I won't do it. Or are you going to go up? I want to do it, how do I do it? I'll try. I think our heart posture, our attitude is important. It's okay if it isn't easy. Look at Jesus. Remember those two principles we talked about before. Just keep seeking it and a time will come. Start small, start somewhere. If 5 minutes in the toilet is all you can get, do it. Also, performance, don't impress others by doing it. And don't try to impress God. God gives us grace. He longs for us and loves us along the journey as he draws us to spending time with him. Thirdly, think short and long. Short. These are easy chickens to chase into the coop. Just wake up and say good morning to God. Maybe recite Psalm 23 or whatever. Sneak and claim little moments in the day. Some ideas there, you could go to your shed, or as I like to call it, my man cave. It's kind of a modern Elijah on Mount Horeb situation there. But just sneak or claim those moments. Where are we up to? Oh, here. Long, short, long. Sabbath. We got spoken to about the Sabbath, and it kind of fits just saying with silence and solitude. A retreat, a holiday, camping, hiking, whatever. As I said, you do you. Think long. Plan that in. Now, number 4, how might you progress in the practice? So this is really important. When you actually start to do this, here's the progression. Firstly, you're going to find there's going to be a distraction battle. So turn off your devices, but also get away from and remove all distractions, pets, kids, the pile of unfinished work staring at you. Give yourself permission to be silent and alone. Next, set a goal of focusing in your mind, imagination, heart, body, for increasing durations each time. Get in tune with yourself. Then you want to start to focus on praying in abiding, just being with Jesus, the Father, His Spirit in you. Just focus on that. Just pray about it. Thank Him for it. Enjoy being with God. It's very important. Don't just go straight to, God, can you do this for me? A list of requests. Actually enjoy just being with God. Next, you're going to have to deal with emotions. As you create this space, the emotions will come out into it. So process them, analyze where they originate, and pray for how to respond in thought and action. Don't be scared of your own emotions. God gave them to you, and God will help sort through them. They have a purpose. They're flags to alert you. If you've neglected this sort of thing for some time, it will take time to consider each one in turn. Be methodical. Park the others while you just bring one out and deal with that. And then I'm told that that often at this point anxiety comes up. This often comes out and it can get worse before it gets better. So if you're feeling that anxiety, just remember to focus on God's running of the universe perfectly without you. His power and His glory and your dependence and finite being. Trust in God. Learn to trust your Father. Very quickly, next, move into prayer to focus on listening to God's voice. Now that you're here, let Him speak. Read the Bible in a slow, prayerful and meditative way. And I highly recommend this. Something that I've done in the last few years is to journal your thoughts and see what God is revealing. And then lastly, retreat. Plan a trip away to max out on silence and solitude opportunities. Now, I've got a whole bunch more tips, which I'm not going to go through, you'll be pleased to know, but I'm going to send them out with the notes on Tuesday for your study during the week if you want to have a look. But there they are really quickly. And so, to conclude, this could be the start of a season of healing and growth for you, for us. This practice is largely lost in our society and churches. And this is our moment as God's people, I think, to connect to God and to show others how to come into a deep relationship with Him. So it's time to come with Jesus to the quiet place. Thank you.